What in God's name are you doing out here? What are you doing out here? What are you doing? Hey folks, Steve the Amateur Historian on another beautiful day locked down in quarantine. And I've got another story for you, and I'm telling you right now, right off the bats, because if you're not into this stuff, go on to another video. Go on to another video on my channel, of course. But this is a sports-related story. It's a local sports-related story, and it's a story my dad always, or well, not always, but he told me about it. And I always wanted to see it because it was a pretty significant event in National Basketball Association history, and it happened in the Memorial Coliseum, actually during the last year that the Portland Trail Blazers used it. So I'm just letting you know right now, it's a sports story. If you don't like that, shuffle off. Now, when we think of, big controversial fights, NBA fights, obviously the first thing we think of is the Malice at the Palace. Led to several suspensions. You had a lot of interaction between players and fans. I know Jermaine O'Neal ran up to punch a guy, but he was so much taller than him that he had to slide down on his knees to get a good shot at him. Pretty much ruined Ron Artest's season. The Indiana Pacers were actually a team, they were a viable title contender that year, and that fight, because it was early in the season, just ruined it for them. And there's some other ones. There's an iconic fight from 1993 between New York and Phoenix. There's an iconic one from, I can't remember if it's 86, thereabouts, where iconic Larry Bird and Dr. J started going at each other's throats. And then Charles Barkley came in and was like holding Bird back so that like Irving and Malone could get shots at Bird. Like these four future Hall of Famers just decking each other. But one event that flies under a radar, and I'm so glad that I actually found video of it, because after my dad told me about this story, I was like, oh man, I want to see that someday. That's some pure drama. I was probably like 11, 12 years old when my dad told me about this, but I was still like, I want the drama. What do you want, dog? I got stories to do. She's going to be there. You don't run that dog off. She lives by her own rules, and she can tell I'm talking about her. Anyway, this story comes to us from the 1994-95 season, and again, inside the Memorial Coliseum in Portland. The Houston Rockets, who were the defending NBA champs, had a pretty good record, were going up against the Portland Trail Blazers, who were kind of mired in this kind of downturn, and they were like hovering around a 500 record, meaning they had pretty much about the same number of wins as losses. So, a lot of people would figure Houston's going to come in and probably take this one pretty easily. It's February 6th, 1995. I don't know what I was doing, but Vernon Maxwell does. Vernon Maxwell was a player with to that point, he'd had a history of, he was just kind of a lively, kind of just all over the place, kind of scatterbrained personality. Took a lot of ill-advised threes. He just kind of did his own thing. He'd piss people off here and there. He'd annoy you here and there for that, but he hadn't really done anything that bad in his career. And here it is, February 6, 1995. The Blazers are playing the Rockets, and the Blazers are just smoking them. They're up by like 25, 26 at halftime. Vernon Maxwell, who was a decent scorer, he scored, 10, 11, 12, 13 a game, is just having a horrible game. I think by the midway point of the third quarter, he'd racked up like 5 points. So he's having a horrible game. He's pissed. He's frustrated. He's probably about ready to lose it. And it would come out later that his wife had recently had a miscarriage. So, in addition to being kind of a wild personality, this guy, Vernon Maxwell, had stuff going on at home that was definitely affecting him as well. I don't know how much it was affecting him in this game, but just the guy had stuff going on. And we got down to, sorry, I have to adjust my notes because we're talking about specific figures here. Okay, we get down to 3 minutes and 33 seconds left in the third quarter. The Blazers are up 79-52. Vernon Maxwell is still locked down at 5 points. And there's a guy named Steve George, fan in the crowd. He's kind of like, if the Houston Rockets bench is right here, and this is the crowd behind the basket. Steve George is just kind of right up here, so he's kind of close. And he apparently starts heckling Vernon Maxwell. He would later claim that he was just heckling Maxwell for having a horrible game, even though, he had 5 points, and he only averaged about 12, 13 a game, and there was still, time left in the third quarter. It's not like he was having the worst game of his career, but the Steve George guy claimed that he was just heckling him for that. And Vernon Maxwell would claim that this guy was heckling him in relation to the miscarriage his wife had recently had. I don't know who's telling the truth. I don't think any fans they spoke to that sat near George said that he made any comments that were that inflammatory. I don't know how close of attention people were paying. I think it was a really loud arena. The Blazers were killing it. So it's really hard to say exactly what. But whatever the case, the Steve George guy apparently triggered something in Vernon Maxwell, whatever it was. And that's when this happened. Now, this was an incredibly rare thing to happen. I remember there was a thing with Charles Barkley when he was playing in Philadelphia where he apparently had a vocal altercation with someone and then went to spit, and he ended up spitting on a kid, and I think he claimed it was accidental. He was just spitting, but his spit hit a kid. You don't just walk away from that. And I know in the early 80s, Cedric Maxwell, another Maxwell, when he played for Boston, and Boston was playing Philadelphia, and in Philadelphia, and some fan was heckling him, and Cedric Maxwell just ran into the crowd and just leaped on this guy. So, altercations with fans had happened, but back in, literally up until the 90s, fights were not super common, but they were almost kind of just generally accepted. In the early days of the NBA, fans would run on the floor and start fist fighting players. You'd come out of the tunnel, fans would be trying to hit you if you were the opposing team. So by this point, it wasn't really happening anymore, and the NBA was getting at a point where it wasn't tolerating that kind of stuff anymore. Fans endangering players, players endangering fans, and here you've got Vernon Maxwell just snapped, goes up the stairs, which is already kind of a breach of protocol in terms of players and what they're expected to do. And then just, boom, goes right at this guy. And I know Rockets players had to run up after him like, oh my God, Cedric, what are you doing? They had to run up and pull him down. And it was an interesting game because Paul Allen, rest in peace, iconic rich man in the tech world. He's the owner of the Blazers, so he was there. And he had Bill Gates there as a guest. So Bill Gates was at the game. And I know periodically Bill Gates would periodically go to Blazer games just because him and Paul Allen were friends. And, jeez, that's not good. But, Jerry Seinfeld was also at the game. And I know he got, interviewed and probably asked, so what, did you see that? What was up with that? So there was actually, more, major celebrities than usual at this random Rockets-Blazers regular season game that got to see Vernon Maxwell go up in the stands and start fighting with this guy. And usually, again, unless it was a really big fight, players didn't really get suspended. You might get a little fine. You might get suspended for, a game. But now, obviously, it's a much more serious thing. They don't want it to happen. And what's interesting is fights happen a lot more often now than they did back then. So, obviously, Vernon Maxwell gets tossed. Blazers end up winning the game 120-82 over the defending champs. And 9 days later, the Blazers would trade their iconic franchise player, Clyde Drexler, to the Rockets. Vernon Maxwell got a pretty stiff penalty. I think he was suspended for 10 games. It was a pretty stiff suspension for that time. And the Rockets went into the playoffs against Utah. Vernon Maxwell only played sparse minutes in Game 1 of their series against Utah. Didn't play well. Claimed he had a hamstring injury bothering him. People later on kind of figured that was just his excuse to get out of the game. So he got pulled from the game and didn't play again. in that series, and then ultimately didn't play again in the playoffs as the Houston Rockets went on to win another championship. And then they got rid of Vernon Maxwell like right afterwards, like they sent him shipping. It was obvious they didn't, by that point, with what happened in Portland, with him not, showing up to the playoffs, whether he was injured or not, they sent him packing. But that wasn't the end of the story. And it was. The suspension he served was the second longest in NBA history after Kermit Washington, who got a major suspension back in the 70s for socking Houston Rockets player Rudy Tomjanovich in the face. Rudy Tomjanovich just happened to be the coach of the Rockets during the, 1995 when this game happened. He was coaching the Rockets when Vernon Maxwell went into the stands. So there's a strange correlation there. But here's what gets me. So Steve George, the guy that, this happened with, he ends up being okay. Vernon Maxwell didn't, separate his arm from his body. He didn't snap his nose off. He filed a $4.5 million lawsuit. Like, I understand you were attacked, you were assaulted. I understand you want some justice for that, but I'm so sick of this. I deserve millions of dollars because I was so horribly wronged nonsense. So, the $4.5 million lawsuit is specifically $1.4 million from Maxwell for the attack, $3.1 million from the Houston Rockets franchise. Specifically, this is the primary reason that they wanted to sue the Rockets and hold them so accountable, beyond the fact that Vernon Maxwell was a player of theirs, was because they didn't get up there and stop Vernon Maxwell quick enough. As though these players were supposed to know that Vernon Maxwell was going to do what he was about to do. And if you see the video, Robert Horry in particular, Houston Rockets forward, was right up there. He was right behind them. Like, there was actually great reaction time on the part of, Robert Horry, if not multiple Rockets players. And George's own attorney, while they're suing the Rockets for over $3 million because they didn't react and stop Vernon Maxwell quick enough, which is just insane, his own attorney, quote, a couple days after they pushed forward with this, said, it would have taken a Superman to be able to see and to react to what was going on and to be able to stop it. So even he acknowledged there was no way these players, anybody with the franchise, could have stopped Vernon Maxwell before he got at least one or two punches in. So the lawsuit was just completely illogical. And the funny thing is, they were very big on settling out of court. They wanted it to be more of a civil thing, even though it could have been something bigger, because again, this was an assault on the part of Vernon Maxwell. So yeah, it was just very, very suspicious the way this thing went down. I certainly don't, think Vernon Maxwell's in the right here. Again, I don't know if this guy was making these inflammatory statements that Vernon Maxwell said he was, but $4.5 million, give me a break. And, yeah, it's just very interesting follow-up. I'm not exactly sure how that those criminal proceedings ultimately went down. If this guy got the $4.5 million, hopefully a slightly logical judge would look at this lawsuit and say $3.1 million for people not doing something that even your own attorney says couldn't have happened. Get the hell out of my courtroom. But it was, that was a major event at the time, for the sport, and it was kind of, even though it was kind of quickly forgotten, the league probably wanted people to forget, it was that kind of big fight, big NBA altercation, player going into the stands thing in the existence of the NBA before the Malice at the Palace happened, and that was almost a decade later before that happened, and obviously that involved several players going to the stands, fighting several fans, lots of legal ramifications, and this is just one guy. But still, a crazy story that happened right here in Portland, and I was so glad to actually find video of it, because when my dad told me about the story, I wanted to go find it. I wanted to see what actually happened. I didn't have the visual to go with the story. And that's what happened in Portland, February 6, 1995. Hope you enjoyed it. Another story from crazy semi-local history while we're all locked down in quarantine. Remember, as always, guys, to like, share, subscribe, comment if you so choose, and Patreon if you're still somehow raking in dough right now. And till next time, this has been Steve the Amateur Historian.